I think I actually finally am live. That was frustrating. I'm sorry, everyone. That was about 25 minutes of Facebook not really doing live posts. I think Facebook traffic is way overwhelmed, but I'm going to try and keep this going, and I want to welcome you to our second town hall with me. I'm the founder and executive director of the Wildcat Sanctuary in Sandstone, Minnesota, and I'm here today to answer the questions that you guys have posed for me. A few admin things is I know a lot of you posed questions and might have missed our first town hall last week, so I won't be duplicating those questions, but definitely go back on our Facebook page and get the answers to those questions from last week. I did an extensive hour-long Q&A last week, and I'm going to try and answer everything you guys posed here. I've got quite a bit. My office's door is open right now, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pets in the small office. So as always, I apologize in advance for the disruption of cats and dogs, but as you, as animal lovers know, I'm sure your home office, hey, and I have dogs trying to eat out of the litter box. Your home office probably is the same way. So first, I just want to thank everybody for the condolences of us having to say goodbye to Lynx Leisha. She was 21 years old, had a long life, but it's still really, really sad to see her go. So I wanted to say thank you guys for all that. And that goes into my first question is so many people have asked me, how do I and the staff deal with grief and loss? And it is a tough situation. I know you guys have all had losses of your four-legged family members, and it hits hard, that's for sure. You know, I personally am the one that writes most of the memorials because that helps me with closure, and it also helps me celebrate their life versus just focus on their death. At the sanctuary, we cremate all of our cats, and once or twice a year, depending upon how many leave us, we do an ash release ceremony. And that's where we get together, we say kind words about the animals we love, and then we release their ashes on site. Sometimes if they had an enclosure mate with their enclosure mate, or we always put a portion of the ashes outside the sanctuary fence, outside any fences, as a symbol of their first day of freedom and not having to live behind a fence. And then you guys help us with the rocks and plaques for the memorial gardens so that their stories and legacy lives on. But getting down to the tactical part of it, what really is draining grief-wise is that at the end of life, unlike a dog or cat who you can walk up to, hold in your arms, and do a little bit of a sub-Q injection, there's cats that won't come up to the fence because they're not feeling well, or even if they do, we have to do a pulse syringe injection. And I can tell you, with Elise and I doing most of that work, that's really what weighs on us. So on occasion, if we're having a really tough time, we might ask the other, can you go give the sedation protocol? Because that cat trusts you, and the last thing you're doing is poking it. And that's why that operant conditioning is so important, to make not only daily husbandry and medical care easy on them, but end of life as well. If they'll approach the fence and easily take a hand injection, it is the most humane way to sedate a cat. But that can be hard. Tracy and Leanne sent me a question, which is kind of ties into it, is compassion fatigue, or how do you actually not burn out or deal with all the cruelty we see, and how do you guys deal with what we see? Well, I think I speak for a lot of us at the sanctuary, is when we go out on rescues and pick up animals, even from horrific situations, that is easier for us because we know the animals are on a way to a better place. What's really the most hard for us is once the animals cross the sanctuary threshold and they're our residents, no matter how long they live, when they pass away, there's a little bit of us that feels like we let them down, even though they can't live to be 28, 29, 30 years old sometimes. It still feels like the what ifs. What if we could have done something different? What if anything else would have changed? And I think that's human nature, and I think that's why we're in the business, because we never want to make a mistake for the animal. But losing the ones we know personally is much harder than going on a rescue and picking them up. But we do see cruelty and neglect. And I'll tell you, compassion fatigue, which is another word for kind of burnout, when you're in this business, you're on a spectrum. And you're never not on the spectrum. If you don't think you're on the spectrum, then you're fooling yourself. But we have to balance each other and really look at life-work balance, look at what do we need to re-energize. Sometimes trading off duties helps. But what also is really hard on top of that compassion fatigue is not only losing the animals, but the bad people, the people that just keep on and on and on, breeding cubs, but also those that attack us sanctuary directors. I mean, personally, they'll exploit every little error you've made, any story you've told. They'll extrapolate just pieces that make it no longer factual, but they put it in a string together to make it sound really horrible. And they just attack and attack and attack personally. And that can be really hard for me, and especially for family and friends that see that happen. And, the other thing is I want to commend sanctuary staff everywhere, whether you're a founder, a caretaker, an office person, is especially if you're a caretaker, this is a sacrifice. And there is something, I'll get on my soapbox a little bit of, it is a sacrifice because you're on call 24/7, just like a doctor. But imagine like a hospital with 115 patients and only 11 staff. It's probably what's happening right now, is it's always overwhelmed. You're always the one on call, whether it's a sick animal, a rescue, an animal not shifting in the winter and we can't let them stay outside. And so that's draining. On top of that, if you're a caretaker or you're a vet tech or even a social worker, these are jobs that have never paid well. And it's very frustrating when I see that somebody is being paid a decent wage, not inflated, and people don't want to support those type of organizations because they think if you are doing good, you're supposed to suffer. And my thing is, we need to change that paradigm. I do not want to burn out the amazing staff we have. They already are burnt out emotionally from the work we do. But also, if they can't pay their bills, if they can't pay rent, if they go home and can't pay their vet bill, what good is that to us? So they're suffering and giving all this time at work and then going home and struggling with bills. They're usually working holidays when people aren't. During COVID-19, when many of us are home, they are on the front line still with those animals. Forest, sorry, is back there. And I think we need to be able to change that paradigm, that we should be able to give people that work in the service world a good livable wage. They should be able to put savings into a retirement. They shouldn't be giving their lives for animals and helping people and then end up having no retirement. They should get health insurance. And here at the sanctuary, we're really trying to change that and be respectful of our staff while still being respectful of donor dollars. But you need the staff to care for the animals, to carry out the mission, whether it's entering your wonderful donations, whether it's a facilities person making sure the septic tanks and the heat in the animal buildings always work, or that direct caretaker or vet. You have to support general operations of any type of rescue work, like I said, whether it's a domestic shelter, a sanctuary worker, even social worker, because you need those staff to perform that work and give the best care. And I want people to support that. So I really want to put out about compassion fatigue is that we shouldn't break those people in the industry. We should celebrate them. And we don't want broken people working for us. If you've seen Tiger King, there are a lot of broken people and they deserve help and a better life. But for us to give the best life for the animals, we want healthy people mentally and physically. So those were some of those questions. On to more fun stuff is cats. People had some cat questions, and I'm sorry that my computer is shaking, but that is Masai, one of my tabby cats, that is rubbing his face all over that. Luckily, the dogs are sleeping, and I think now I'm down to 3 animals in the office versus 5, so it'll be a little less distracting. But Jennifer asked, what are the most temperamental species or animals? Not necessarily specific cat by cat, but is there a breed that's more temperamental? Leopards are known to be the most temperamental of all cats. It's almost like they can premeditate versus react. They're known in the wild to go into camps and take people out of their beds. They're known, obviously, to strategize, to kill and steal their food from other animals. And so leopards can be very, I won't say dangerous because all apex predators are, but very challenging to work with in a captive environment. And that's why they are great candidates for operant conditioning and enrichment to keep those minds stimulated and keep them busy mentally versus plotting to do what leopards do. And then also bobcats. People underestimate bobcats. Bobcats can be the sweetest purring little cats that look so friendly, and they're small in stature, but they have a low tolerant threshold. And so when they decide they're frustrated or they need to, assert their wild side, man, they change really quick. They don't really have a lot of notice of deciding if they're being sweet or if they're being possessive by nature. So they are very interesting to work with too, but they're all very specific. Kristen asked, how do our animals do in Minnesota winters? It's the biggest question we get asked. The one thing is most of these animals are rescued from places that have them outdoors with just den boxes, no heat source. And in the wild, even the native species like bobcats and cougars, even though they can deal well with the cold, when they're in a captive environment in somebody's backyard and all they have is a barrel to get into and they get straight line winds and cold, that is not appropriate housing at all. Excuse me, Mr. Masai. Masai, why don't you go over there and play with that? Appropriate at all. And so in the wild, these even native species would go den down and get out of those cold extremes. So in Minnesota, we have the temperature controlled buildings. They can get in and out anytime they want, but we have to keep it about 50 degrees because we don't want them getting pneumonia from going to hot, cold, hot, cold. But even the African cats that we take in and get acclimated, they all get much thicker coats in the winter, so they do acclimate that way. But obviously the warmer temperature cats like servals will spend a little bit more inside in time, but the leopards and tigers even love it outside in the winter. So they do just fine, but we do try not to take a serval in the middle of the winter if we can help it. But if we do, we keep them indoors for quite a bit of time so they get used to their safe temperature controlled zone before they get access to their habitat. So we know that they'll come back in out of the cold when they need to. Melanie's asking, do the cat, sorry, cat, sorry guys, that was Masai. I'm going to move the mouse. He just turned off my screen, so hopefully you're still there. But do cats know their names and do they learn them quickly? Each cat is very individual, but I think they look at their names as cues. So when it's repeated enough, they do know it's a cue to pay attention, that there might be enrichment or food. Some cats respond much more to others when it comes to their names, but we haven't ever seen anything negative. We do change names on few occasions, only if they're very negative names. So when Diablo came to us, the jaguar, and it meant devil, we changed it to Diablo Guapo or DG so that it meant handsome devil. But cats do respond to their names. I have Jarrett asking, do I have a favorite wildcat? Well, I try not to answer this question because I feel guilty, But now that I've been doing this 20 years, my favorites, most of you will know, are Baby Jenga the bobcat, Cleo the serval, Bosco the serval, Mufasa. I would say they're the originals that started the sanctuary because there's only a handful of them left. And what we do is wonderful, and what our staff does is wonderful, but it is much different than when we started, and I was the primary caretaker, and I did work with these cats day in and day out, and was feeding and cleaning and vet work and enrichment. So those originals hold a special place in my heart because it's what started the sanctuary, and it will be a different feeling around the sanctuary when those original cats are gone. Next question was, overall, how many cats have we rescued or I've rescued? We don't keep track. We keep track of the residents at our sanctuary, but I would say we're about, if we have 116 residents, we've had, you know, over 20 years, probably 70 to 80 pass, and plus all of those that I refer and make sure find homes somewhere else. And of course, the domestics, not the ones that live with me, but all those domestics that show up at TWS and we find homes for. I mean, I would say I'm definitely over 500 or 600 that our sanctuary is touching hands in, and probably close to 1,000 overall, but it's not something we tally. I think mostly because we don't look at animals as numbers, we look at them as individuals. And so that's not something like I know off the top of my head. It's another weird question when people say, how many tigers do you have? How many bobcats? Unless I have a quick reference, I don't know the species breakdown off the top of my head. I have a good idea because I don't look at it as a collection of animals. I look at Callie is Callie, and you know, Jeremy is Jeremy. And so those numbers we definitely record and have as part of TWS and inventory, but it's not how we treat the animals on a daily basis. So somebody's asked, you know, the resistance over the years, how do we deal with that? And we kind of talked about that, and has it gotten better? I think we're educating, and I think as more news articles are out and places, things like Tiger King, as bad as it might be, people are knowing about the issue. In the beginning, people kind of didn't even understand that there was a captive wildlife crisis. They didn't see it. They didn't know about it. They just would go to their family roadside zoo and think nothing of it. So absolutely, we are seeing the general public support it more, but we're seeing the breeders and dealers get a lot more nasty, a lot more underground, a lot more unethical to continue doing what they're doing. And so we're just having to stay united as a sanctuary industry to speak in one voice through the Big Cat Sanctuary Alliance and Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries and Animal Sanctuary Association to make sure we're aligned and we're all fighting the same battle. Linda asked, do I know each cat by face? And any of you that have seen me on live posts, yes, I know each resident. Our caretakers know each resident by face, by cat in the habitat. You know, Noah and Carlo, two cougar brothers, can look very similar, except Carlo likes to play with his ball, and Noah's a little longer in the body, has different markings on the nose. And so sometimes if I take a quick glance at the 5 wild, I might have to wait 30 seconds for the cat's behavior to show to know who's who, but no two cats get mixed up at TWS. Now, if somebody takes a photo like Judson and shows us the photo, sometimes it can be confusing, especially with the cougar brothers and sisters, because you're not seeing behavior and you might be seeing just a side or the sunlight hits. But each cat, we have ID tests. Every caretaker, every intern has to pass an ID test, not only who is who in a habitat, but who's dominant, so you know who to feed first, who to lock out first. Also, any medical or behavioral issues with each cat, what medication they're on and why they're on it, and what the medication is supposed to do. So there's a lot of education that goes into each animal, because our mission at the sanctuary is not only to end the captive wildlife crisis, but we treat every animal as an individual, and whether that's behavioral and medical, and address those needs on an individual basis. What cat has had the biggest change in demeanor, Jill asks. There's been so many over the years, but I